All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of Not Funny Guys Presents Go Team Venture. We're moving on now to our final episode covering Season 2. All right, we're down to Viva los Muertos, or Muertos. Sorry if my Spanish is bad, but apparently it means Long Live the Dead. This aired on October 1st, 2006, written by Ben Edlund, who I found out was the creator of The Tick, or co-creator of The Tick. I think the cartoon, possibly. So, cool. Learn something new every day when you're doing this stuff. But yes, before I jump into the episode, real quickly, sure you like, subscribe, follow along, comment. We're rolling on here as we wrap up Season 2. And we open with a very POV point of view through the goggles of one of Monarch's henchmen, minions, he likes to call them, storming the compound. From this POV, we also learned that the one we're talking to is going by this being called Tex, or Texas, by 21. They listen to their battle speech, they smoke their cigarettes, they go over the trench line, and of course, this unfortunate soul does not escape Brock Sampson and dies, only to be resurrected by Dr. Venture, pulling a full-on Frankenstein zombie bit. Calling it the Holy Grail of super science. I guess reanimation? Holy Grail? Okay. Of course, it messes up. Brock has to break in his brain, and so they end up sewing an African-American man's skull to the top of this guy, white guy's skull. Comes up later. We also now flash forward to where we are now. We've resurrected him. At the same time, Dr. Orpheus arrives eventually to tell them that he's holding some sort of spiritual seance, and a knockoff version of the Scooby-Doo, a very dark knockoff version of the Scooby-Doo gang shows up to look for mysteries. We have Patty, Val instead of Velma, and Ted instead of Fred, and instead of Scooby and Shaggy, we get Groovy and Sunny, and the whole Groovy talking dog thing is played kind of up like a Son of Sam thing, for which Sunny is continuously looked down upon, like trying to prove the dog talks. So, we now have a name we're going by for this new Venture zombie Frankenstein. We're calling him Venturestein, and we're in the middle of him being socialized, which eventually leads him to being put into one of the learning beds. Of course, the mystery team are here to solve a mystery, and they break into the Venture's industrial compound. Venturestein is very much afraid of Brock, who happened to be the guy who killed him, so it makes sense. Of course, Dr. Ho-Oh, I said, was holding a gathering, so we have these three little things kind of happening, and Brock is kind of off his game. Something about Venturestein has made him look back on his killing ways and sort of have an existential crisis that's affecting his ability. And so he's invited to the gathering and will go to the gathering at Dr. O's place. Hank and Dean apparently notice the mystery gang snooping around the industrial wing and go to investigate. And eventually, when they do encounter Groovy and Sunny, Sunny freaks out because he apparently, along with Groovy, killed two previous versions of Hank and Dean in Brazil in a mine. We come to that later. But let's see. Yeah, they go to the manufacturing wing. Venturestein, of course, is in one of the learning beds at this point, learning all about the benefits of child labor because he's being trained to basically be a robotic slave, a zombie slave. Of course, Brock's at the spiritual enlightenment. They take something that, like, I'm assuming it's meant to be like a version of ayahuasca. And then Brock goes on a complete trip where he's swimming with dolphins naked before a version of hunter-gatherer shows up to remind him he's a killing machine. The sex change version, too, with blurred out nipples. All that fun stuff. And of course, going back to the Sunny and Groovy story, apparently this was 2 years previously that the incident happened with them. Like I said, the whole hunter-gatherers thing snaps him out of this sort of weird enlightenment trip he goes on. Yeah, so then he after he decides he's not going to ride the talking dolphin anymore, we end up having him and the boys and the Scooby-Doo gang all somehow magically converge on the place where Dr. Venture keeps all the clones, which is only making Sunny and Groovy and all them freak out more. The boys see it and they faint. And then Brock shows up to sort of put an end to the whole thing. And then Venturstein starts talking about prostitutes. That was a little weird. Of course, Ted and Sonny get the worst of it from Brock. Ted has a gun and takes care of him. I think he has him shoot Sonny. I don't know what happened to Sonny, and he looks like he breaks Ted's arms. The boys have freaked out, but when Dr. Venture wakes them up, he plays it all off as a Christmas present surprise they stumbled upon, that they would have their own little manservant clones, because of course they are clones. But he has to do something to make them feel better. And then of course the fun ending is Brock is taking Venturstein to get a prostitute. So yeah. Cool, man. All right. So that brings us to the end of episode 11. Like I said, Ben Edlund's the writer of this one. And please, if you're not already, like, subscribe. We're going to move on now to cover both parts of our finale, Showdown at Cremation Creek. All right. So here we are. Showdown at Cremation Creek Part 1. This aired on October 8, 2006, written by Jackson Public and Doc Hammer. And I believe Part 2, I did not write down my notes there, but that would have been on the next week, Part 2. But let's just get into it. So we find Dr. Girlfriend and the Monarch have been sort of sneaking around 3 days a week, apparently, rendezvousing at some cheap motel. They're having these meetups, and something about Dr. Girlfriend's kind of wanting more than this, because it's like she's technically still living with Phantom Limb and all that fun stuff. And she's talking about all the times you can't keep making these weird excuses. And that their secret meetings are getting kind of innocuously boring. And apparently Monarch's like, okay, can't lose her, marry me. So he proposes. Dr. Girlfriend accepts, but she wants ground rules. And the big one is she wants him to knock it off with Dr. Venture. Because apparently, if it's not clear at this point, he has an unhealthy obsession with his arch enemy. Which gets complicated because we then flash forward 1 month to find that the aftermath of some sort of bachelor party, 21-24, find that Brock Sampson and the Venture family are locked up. We will later find out how that all happened. We then cut to Phantom Limb. The Monarch has come to tell him that Dr. Girlfriend and him are getting married. Phantom Limb is trying to obviously intimidate him by playing the most dangerous game, using the former inmates that with the Monarch back at the beginning of season 2, the ones who betrayed him, really, and shooting them in his backyard. We also find that the Order of Triad is fighting Torrid, and then they decide that they really need to do more training, so they're planning a little get-together. That won't go very far. We have Brock, Dr. Sampson, and Sampson all them back in the cells. The Monarch shows up, and he's scared as hell because he promised to stop arching Dr. Venture. 21 tells the Monarch that how they encountered this. They were all getting drunk at the party. The Monarch had gone to bed. They went out to get a tattoo. 21 apparently had finally gotten brave enough. They found Brock at the tattoo parlor, and they jumped him. Didn't go down super easy, but they did get them. And then once they realized this, it was so easy for them to go grab the rest of the family and brought them in here. Well, when Dr. Girlfriend shows up and she's about to call off everything, Monarch basically covers and says Dr. Venture is here to be his best man, to let bygones be bygones. And at this point, somehow Rusty, Dr. Venture, finally puts two and two together that Dr. Girlfriend is Charlene from way back in the Midlife Chrysalis episode. And so he later then begins to try and hit on her. I don't know why he finally figured this out. But we also hear about the Council of 13 for the Guild and the Sovereign denying Phantom Limb his request to go after the Monarch. But apparently the Sovereign even tries to suggest they keep a journal and other coping methods for being broken up with. But apparently Phantom Limb has just sort of decided to mobilize a guild attack. And he's going to pull a coup. Back in the pod, we have 21 and Hank, 24 and Dean sort of paired up, getting dressed. Dean ends up going to the engine room where he will have an entirely strange, hallucinogenic journey of his own. 21 gets into Hank gets into an old 21 costume from which he will start calling himself Russian Guyovich as his sort of like pseudo name, where he wears a fake goatee. But we now have the wedding proceeding, the wedding list. And I do want to mention this, so I've got my list off to the side here, but there are quite a few people we have here. Bearded Spectre. Of course, we have Brock Sampson. Dr. Killinger is back as the officiant. We have Rusty as the best man, Hammerhead, Abomination, Hank Venture as Russian Goyovich, Hate Bit, 2124 there, Iggy Pop shows up, and the escort along with Klaus Nomi for David Bowie. Finally seeing David Bowie. We have Kevin, a Monstroso, Plug Face Guy, Princess Tiny Feet, who's there with her date Sergeant Hatred, the Fluttering Horde, Intangible Fancy, of course David Bowie, who we will come to learn is the Sovereign. Yeah, a whole bunch of other unnamed villains, but there's like a who's who. It's crazy. Long list there, but we got to get introduced to these. So we also, of course, we finally get to see up close Sergeant Hatred and Princess Tiny Feet, for which apparently Sergeant Hatred has a really strong foot fetish. Go figure. Of course, David Bowie is there to give the bride away. And of course, we then will eventually learn that he is also the Sovereign. And of course, when Dr. Girlfriend's coming down the aisle, Rusty, Dr. Venture, starts talking about the lyrics to Jesse's Girl, which I think if anybody knows Jesse's Girl, it's about being jealous of someone else's girlfriend. Yeah. And the Monarch even calls him out. And then Dr. Killinger, of course, being and then Phantom Limb attacks when they still go to say the I do. So they actually don't officially get married in this episode, but then he demands that he give her that he wants Dr. Girlfriend. He won't give her up, which is all a ploy because apparently he doesn't really want her at all. We find out in the next episode. But that's where part 1 ends. And we go to part 2. We get what I like to call a super speed recap that you'd have to slow down to like super even catch most of it. There's a whole panic at the wedding. Monarchs, everybody's fleeing because Phantom Limb's going to attack. Monarch tells Phantom Limb off. The coup ensues when Klaus Nomi and Iggy Pop turn on David Bowie. And they're going to eliminate the Sovereign. Apparently, Phantom Limb wants to be the Sovereign now. Monarch and Brock even team up, but Iggy gets they get the drop on them, and eventually it appears as if David Bowie has been terminated, and we see Iggy Pop pick up a pair of smokes. Please note that. All right. Dean, being trapped in the thing, gets weird hallucinations where he goes on a trip thinking about Giant Boy Detective, who looks like Billy Quizboy. In fact, everybody in his hallucination ends up looking like people. His father looks like a rat. The order of the Triad is to learn that there's trouble through Orpheus's powers and decide they really should go do something. And I can't remember his name, but they manifested Lando's co-pilot from Return of the Jedi. The weird guy who, and so he helps them fly the X-1 to go rescue them. They have to launch the cocoon to go into battle. Brock basically becomes the commander of the henchmen for this thing. Phantom Limb has Dr. Girlfriend on his command ship. They finally reveal that David Bowie was the Sovereign and that the new Sovereign is Phantom Limb because he's trying to take over. They're running up and down the canyon, Grand Canyon. I'm assuming we're still here. Brock is in charge of the suicidal henchmen as they go on a basically strike team mission to get the Dr. Girlfriend back. And they actually find out that the suits they've been wearing with these ridiculous wings actually work. It's amazing it took them this long. Of course, Dean is basically hallucinating a version of the never-ending story down in the engine room. Like I said, his father is depicted as a rat. The Monarch is depicted as a giant insect bug. Hank even sneaks into the attack as Russian Goyovich alias, only to have Brock later realizes him and then try to protect him. Phantom Limb, of course, reveals the coup, and that apparently his whole thing with Dr. Girlfriend, this attack on the wedding, was not even about her. It's about power. Like I said earlier, Iggy Pop has the smokes. He goes outside only to find out that David Bowie is a shapeshifter. He shapes his back. He's not dead. He then helps rescue Dr. Girlfriend. Brock acts a lot like a Han Solo to Hank's Luke Skywalker. There's a couple of Star Wars lines in there. Dean's continuing to hallucinate. And he ends up taking out the cocoon's engine. And then, of course, Sovereign and Phantom Limb face off. Brock, Hank, 2124 all end up attacking the command ship. The X-1 at one point then finally crashes into the cocoon as Dr. Venture and the Monarch escape in the escape cocoon that ends up then hitting the command ship with Phantom Limb. They all crash. Phantom Limb has magically escaped, losing some part of himself. The Monarch and Dr. Girlfriend reunite. Phantom Limb has, like I said, somehow escaped. And then Hank was like, when Sovereign - David Bowie leaves and turns into an eagle, Hank says, "Guy from Labyrinth turned into an eagle." And then we come to a punch credit where Dr. Girlfriend has some sort of weird secret she reveals, and then we don't see them again. They're inside the floating like escape cocoon that has like the Monarch's bedroom, and they've just had coitus, and it ends with the Monarch. You hear him screaming. So that brings us to the end of that, and it brings us to the end of season 2. We will be starting season 3 on Friday. So I look forward to that with you guys. Like I said, hopefully you'll be watching along. Now, it is worth noting season 3 is the last season that is available on Netflix. So starting season 3, I'm going to start looking into other locations where you can watch this if you do not have access to Adult Swim or old streaming episodes, or you don't happen to own the DVDs. I happen to own a lot of versions of this show. But yeah, so like, subscribe, follow along, and I will see you guys next time. Say not funny guys again.
Not funny guys again.
No, can you say not funny guys?